Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is a way to catch healthcare fraud. So in a previous A Healthcare Z video, I talked about how catching fraud really needs to come first for employer-sponsored health plans, because that then gives the employer the credibility to then go to the employees and to the doctors and hospitals that they work with to have them change, because the employer-sponsored plan has already cleaned their side of the street by cleaning up the fraud. Okay, well that then begs the question, where would you start in terms of cleaning up the fraud? Okay, so this is a way. There are obviously multiple ways to clean up fraud, but I'm going to tell you a way. So what you're going to do is you're going to need to look at the paid claims with the provider ID. So you're probably going to have to be self-funded in order to be able to get this information, and you need to have the specific provider ID or the name. Okay, so every UB04 and HIPAA 1500 has to have the tax ID on it, so you can actually get a claims file that says Hospital A, Dr. X, the XYZ clinic or practice. You can actually get it by provider name. You likely will not get the allowed amount. In other words, what the contracted negotiated rate is between the insurance carrier and that particular provider. And the reason for that is because that's their quote-unquote proprietary contracted rate. So if they gave you both of those, oftentimes they'll give you the allowed amount or they'll give you the provider, but they typically will not give you both, they being the carrier. Well, they will typically not give you both, okay? So in this case, okay, just getting the data can be challenging, but it's okay to just get billed charges. We're okay with that. We don't need to have the allowed amount, all right? Next up, we're going to analyze the high volume, low dollar claims. And by low dollar, I mean billed charges of less than $2,000, okay? But this high volume is super important. So we're gonna look at the large number of small bills for both out-of-network. It'd be good to know out-of-network and in-network, okay, but it's not required. And the reason it would be helpful to know out-of-network versus in-network has to do with how we then address the problem, because fixing the out-of-network high-volume claims versus the in-network high-volume claims that are potentially fraudulent, it's different. But let's move on. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to sort that. You're going to get an Excel spreadsheet or a database, whatever, and you're going to sort it by the number of claims by provider. So in other words, provider X has the most claims. Provider Y has the second most claims. And you keep going down by the number of claims. And what you're going to do is you're going to look for little known providers. So your employer might have a headquarters in a major city, and the major hospital system in that city might have the highest number of claims. Okay, that kind of makes sense. However, if you have a large number of claims from some sort of provider or physician office or practice or outpatient facility that is not well known, then that starts asking the question, okay, why do we have so many claims at a place that's kind of small? Let me give you an example. So there might be one particular doctor, like Dr. A, and Dr. A might be a dermatologist or a cardiologist, and he or she might have 800 claims within a calendar year, and their bill charges is $550 per claim. Okay, so if you multiply the 800 times the 550, that's almost $500,000 of claims. So your company's spend might be $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. And so you're thinking, okay, well, $500,000, that's not that much. But I wrote this number 260 over here because that's the number of working days in a year. So let's say this doctor's office was only open during business days. That means in order to have 800 claims within a year, that 3 of your plan members need to be seen by this doctor every day. Okay, that's a little odd. That should raise some eyebrows. Okay, next up, let's say instead of a particular doctor, let's say it's a facility that has multiple providers, and that might be a chiropractor or a physical therapist, etc. And they might have 1,100 claims. And oh, by the way, the bill charge is $780 per claim. Okay, if you do the math on the 1,100 times the $780 per claim, that's almost $900,000. So again, maybe, you oftentimes will look at your very large claims, so $500,000 claims, $1 million claims. Okay, so these are obviously on a per claim level much smaller, but when you add them up, they're the equivalent of a major ICU stay, etc. Okay, so you're going to be looking at high volume, low dollar threshold amounts. Now, The fraud that might be occurring is that those providers might possibly be waiving the deductible, coinsurance, and copay. And I'll leave a link in a show note that explains in detail why that's fraud. But in order to drive that type of patient volume to their particular offices or clinics, they will likely have to drop the patient out-of-pocket cost to zero. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get that many people from your plan to go and see them. Okay, and you have a plan design that for both in-network and out-of-network providers probably has some degree of out-of-pocket cost. So, if those providers are waiving that out-of-pocket cost, that is potentially fraud that you can stop. Okay, that then begs the question, how would you stop that? What are the actions that you would take? First action is, first you would obviously want to alert the carrier, because if they're in-network, maybe they need to be dropped from the network. Okay, next, you would want to notify the State Department of Insurance, again, because this is potentially fraudulent activity, so they need to look into it in themselves, because they may be able to take action on it. However, both these organizations, the carrier and the state, are so large and bureaucratic that it's reasonable to expect not much to come out of that in a short period of time. It's going to take a while to play out. What could you do in the near term? Okay, one, if your problem is related to out-of-network providers, okay, one, you could move to a POS plan, a point of service plan, right? Because there, if the out-of-network provider bills the plan for services, they'll be like, well, you're an out-of-network provider, we've got a POS plan, we're just not going to pay based upon that. Now, there's a number of reasons why employers would maybe not necessarily want to move to a POS plan, but it is certainly not viable options. At Compass, we worked with lots of major corporations that had to attract and retain very skilled employees, and they had POS plans. And that's a good way of addressing fraud. Next up, if you don't want to move to a POS plan, you could change your carrier to a TPA. And the reason that you would want to do that is because TPAs tend to have much lower thresholds to examine the individual claims instead of automatically adjudicating them. So a lot of the major carriers will have sort of auto adjudication levels of like $10,000 a claim or $5,000 a claim or even $2,000 a claim. And they process so many claims that they can't look at claims less than that because they just have too much. It would like overload their system. However, with a smaller TPA, maybe we drop that down to $1,000 or $500 because on a per claim basis, it's not a lot of money. But when you add up 800 claims, 1,100 claims, then it starts adding up. And you'd be able to scrutinize each one of those claims, potentially withhold payment or withhold future payments to that provider as a way of recourse. So, now, there are other ways you can solve this problem too. There are specific vendors out there that address fraud that might be good to hire. I have no connection with them whatsoever. Now, we could go on and on about other types of fraud, but this is a type of fraud that you can actually do something about. And that's my point for today. Thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.